Greetings, it's I, Cantus Narrandco, your Lord and Emperor, here at the Dracovin Empire, and welcome for more Spooktober! Ooh! Yes, it's been October, and we've been talking about slightly more spooky tabletop topics in our dives into lore and some mechanics here and there. And today I've got one that's more interesting because it's an ancient civilization. Now, I have mentioned plenty of ancient civilizations on Golarion, so it's a Pathfinder one, plenty of times, but today we're going into one that deals with alien deities, blood rituals, cannibalism, good things. Wonderful, wonderful things for your civilization. Yes, we're going to be talking about Ghol-Gan, Cyclops civilization, and their degeneration, to say the least. And the temperatures are so weird today. Where am I going with everything in existence? And sometimes my brain just breaks and forgets stuff when we're talking about it right in the middle of it. If you have dealt with anything with Ghol-Gan or Cyclops or stuff, that's my question for today and talking about the comments below. That's what I'm interested in. So let me know. What were your dealings with the Cyclopses? Let's get started in talking about them. And the best place to look when we get started with all these topics, of course, is books. I like to throw this out here because as much as I use some reviews of some of the books, a little information, combined with the Pathfinder Wikipedia page, honestly, I do recommend, if you really want to use a lot of these topics, especially if you're going to run a game with them, you deep dive yourself. So, some books that I recommend to look into deep dive deeper is campaign settings. Lost Kingdom's a really good one to look at. So this is the one I recommend more than any of them, is Lost Kingdoms. This will give you the most amount of information on Ghol-Gan. But also the Interseed World Guide and Isles of the Shackles are also books that will give you some information. This one's a little bit better because it's some better stuff. So let's talk a little bit about Ghol-Gan. Because honestly, you need to know about the ancient civilization of the Cyclops. It is an actual civilization, one that rivaled things like Aslant and the Thassalonians, Thassalon, which were the other great empires when world fell. But the thing is, even with the great destruction of the Starstone and Earthfall, Ghol-Gan was already collapsing. So it was a civilization that wasn't destroyed by Earthfall. This is the important thing to talk about it. They had already begun their vast destruction and collapse. This map here doesn't tell a lot of the story other than where it was. You gotta explain this a lot. It's an important thing to see it. So, it was once a great civilization. An ancient civilization, predating the civilizations of humans, by far. The great human civilizations of Aslan and Thassalon came about post-Cyclops. They actually came about in its height during the Age of Serpents, when the great serpent empires were on the surface. When the serpent folk controlled a lot of it. So that's a kind of an interesting thing that they competed with one of the more ancient races to rule the planet. Their civilization, though, broke apart, and as I mentioned, it degenerated into the worship of alien deities, blood rituals, cannibalisms, and just collapsed. I'll talk a little bit about their capital, but their capital was Sarban, and religiously they worshipped the sun and moon in their classical period. That's information we know about, because we deal with ruins of Ghol-Gan to learn about them. So, in the height of its civilization, it covered the map I'm showing you now, which is the area of the Shackles and Mediogalti Island, as well as southern parts of the Sodden Lands, a big chunk of western along the Expanse. A lot of their first cities are what was in the center of the Eye of Abandigo. It was during this time period, before Earthfall, that the Grund continent actually stretched farther west into the Arcadian Ocean. And the Shackles were the mountain chains that connected Mediogalti to what is modern-day Rahadu. The land between these mountains, what is the Sodden Lands, were sprawling hills and jungles with a climate similar to the Mwangi Expanse. This is where Ghol-Gan strived. In a combination of the destruction of Earthfall and the changes in the planet that caused by it, sunk the land, destroyed the land. I mean, look at the Aslan continent. It's broken apart and shattered. If an entire continent can be shattered by an apocalyptic thing happening, think about this one part of it that was nearby to it. So that's why so much of Ghol-Gan and their civilization has been lost. But, other than we know that its height was technically during the Age of Serpents, and it was rose before Aslant, the exact origins are unknown. When did the Cyclops create their civilization? Certainly modern-day Cyclops are a descendant of them, but they are a offshoot. It's like if some people in modern civilization had their civilization collapse, and rather than rebuild it somehow, they degenerated back to Stone Age. That's kind of what happened with this Cyclops civilization. But consider Earthfall and the Great Destruction. Certainly, that made it that it was very hard to rebuild civilization after their collapse, while many other human civilizations, when their civilizations collapse, the leftovers of that civilization go rebuild something new somewhere. They don't have an apocalypse to drive them out. So, it's the unfortunate part of Cyclops here. There are 4 periods of time that we can talk about during Ghol-Gan's history that are vastly defined by scholars who study them. First is the prehistoric time. And this is the least understood of all Ghol-Gan's civilization. It's known this is when the Cyclops first formed settlements. They worship nature spirits. Some artifacts, evidence has been found from this period, but this is the one that has been lost the most. Because this is the one that was old during a lot of other of the Ghol-Gan's civilization. It's sort of like the layers were already there, but because in the big giant eye, hurricane that's permanently there, probably deep under the water, there is where a lot of this evidence is for this prehistoric time period. Under the ruins of a lot of other ruins, it's a lot of it's gone. Most of the ruins that remain above the waters in the Arcadian Ocean that are discovered are from the pre-classical period or later. The pre-classical period being the next one. Basically, these areas that remained above water were settled by the Ghol-Gan Cyclopses after the prehistoric era had ended. The pre-classical period is marked by their first encounter with dragons, the two-eyed Cyclopses, and other giants. So this is a time period of expansion for the Cyclops civilization, the pre-classical period, and it's also marked by their encounter with a lot of other major species that are on the planet, honestly. Then we get into the classical period, which is a very big period here. The classical period was when they developed the writing system, grasped the significance of their mono-eyed physiology in comparison to a lot of other species, and began to understand their own beings. Because they are one-eyed beings, and they're very unique and different than a lot of other species on Golarion. Most are two-eyed. So developing writing, understanding why they are unique, different, and their own thing, kind of developing philosophy related to it. In their new understandings, the sun and moon became their kind of connections with the world and culture, both resembling an eye. So there's new twin spherical deities, gave them a connection of superiority. They practiced animal sacrifice during this time period. This is the height of their civilization. It flourished, expanded. Settlements grew into first true cities they had. They had vast limestone and basalt ziggurats. Many of which exist now today, which are still kind of connected with the Cyclops of Ghol-Gan in this area. Their cities grew to support tens of thousands of inhabitants. And of course, Saraban, which was their capital and the largest of their cities, was believed to have been home to over 100,000 Cyclops. And you may say, well, what about, Aslan, Thassalons? Well, they developed, yes, a lot of magic and science and stuff like that. But think about this as like a civilization before these that existed and fell out of grace by the time they got a lot of power. They also expanded downward when Ghol-Gan grew. They didn't just expand outward. So they pierced layers into the Darklands. Narvoth in Golgani, which was Rigare, the Sleepless Realm, but inadvertently did start their civilization's decline during this time. It was here that they first encountered the Serpent Folk. These were the fringes of the great Serpent Folk Empire that existed going underground. Because the Serpent Folk Empire was both on the surface, but also went underground. The Serpent Folk Empire wasn't that far, was reaching underground this far into the area of course, Gavrund. Which meant this is the first time they're experiencing these. They saw this realm, Gregory, Narvoth, as just another realm to conquer by crushing the Serpent Folks. But those that were in the depths away from their sun and moon gods, they strayed into madness. Those who spent their most of their lives below abandoned their celestial deities, adopted dark philosophies the Serpent Folk had that they'd fought announced. The foul, malign beliefs found their way to the surface and were adopted by both commoners and nobility. Animal sacrifice gave way to Cyclops sacrifice, and eventually it descended into bloodthirsty cannibalistic acts. So it's sort of like they went underground, encountered and battled and fought the Serpent Folk, and started defeating them and making victories. But those underground there kind of went a little insane and began believing in the dark things that the Serpent Folk believed in. And that led them, of course, to bringing that back to everyone else. Some of the most potent seers in Ghol-Gan foresaw the collapse, warned their leaders away from the Platts, this path of destruction, but it fell on deaf ears. Those that did manage fled and formed the distant empire of Golarion, which is another nation to talk about, because unfortunately its empire was also destroyed by the Starstone events. So they tried to escape, so they're also a lost Cyclops civilization. They tried to keep what was the essence of Ghol-Gan alive, and Earthfall destroyed them too. They traveled to Casmaron in what's modern-day Iboria, in the remote Iron Nation of Abolius. And those that remained behind, though, descended into the post-classical era by reinterpreting their old gods. The sun became a ruthless oppressor to be appeased by mass slaughter and rivers of blood, and the full moon was celebrated by appalling debauchery and unspeakable acts. So now we enter post-classical. Ghol-Gan is effectively fallen. The corruption that they encountered, that they embraced in the Darklands, brought to the surface, spread about. Those that try to fight against it have fled, and this is the last phase. It's marking by the decline in their conquests in Western Grund, their moral decline as they abandoned what little shreds of restraint remained, and in the darkness of Narvoth, horrible, monstrous rituals, atrocities took place. The Ghol-Gan people embraced the worship of foul entities such as the Blood Queen, the formless chaos that lies beneath the Smaras, and Azathoth. The formless chaos that lies behind the stars, Azathoth, which is basically, Cthulhian dark tapestry stuff. And the Blood Queen is not great either. The Kuru worshipper, the Shackles, who are cannibals. Anyway, so they're really both very horrible things to start worshipping. And they did. Artifacts in this area have incredible artistry of earlier eras, lack the incredible artistry of earlier eras, and instead depict the people seemingly embracing their doom and abandoning all morals. The worship of these nightmarish creatures further warped their minds. They performed unspeakable experiments on their fellow Cyclops, breeding with unlordly creatures to create new spawns and hybrids. The Gogoga still lurk, which are hybrids of orangutans and Cyclops that were created during this time. They still lurk in the long expanse as a relic of this time period. It was also said that they were granted, they were to be granted as a gift from their sinister divine patron at the end of their empire, at the end of the post-classical empire, and were used and to be trained as war beasts. They slew one another in mass, feasted upon the flesh of their own kindred, and blew to beasts that their lost glories of their civilization would be returned by doing this. So by the end of the time of legend, so this is all during this time period, we have Aslant and Thassalon developing their civilizations and building their civilizations. By the time the Starstone was coming, this civilization was basically dead, because they went super dark and murdered each other horribly. And did a lot of bad things. The earthquakes sank most of the area beneath the waves of the Arcanian Ocean, into the area that will become the Eye of Abednego. The tunnels that connected them with the Darklands collapsed, leading the very few regions of the Darklands that they had control of cut off from the rest of the Darklands even. The last patriarch of the Ghol-Gan was Amalon the Sixth. His treasures are said to be contained within a waterlogged temple of Xanathum and Sodden temples. Most of the information on Ghol-Gan today is obtained by expeditions to dangerous ruins like this one. Hundreds have died trying to explore the sunken ruins beneath the Gold Phoenix Aviary in search of the treasures. The next date that can be noted is, of course... I'm sorry, I was supposed to... No. Is in 4111 AR, when some Chilaxian explorers rediscovered ruins of Ghol-Gan, but found them very disturbing and declined to settle there. They were convinced that the coastline was haunted and cursed, and they continued forward and founded the colony of Sargava. So, Sargava still exists today to a degree. That's a country to talk about in the future, but yeah, this entire area, they kind of came by it and were like, you know what? No, we're gonna say no to that and keep going. And there's reason for that. Honestly, even parts of the classical period, classical ruins are probably when they were starting to descend into debauchery, are probably tainted by a lot of that debauchery and connections with horrible ancient things. It wasn't until that post-classical when it really went bad. Oh boy. Ooh. So, this is a Ghol-Gani Cyclops. Akmon. I don't know where the image is from, but it's named. It goes with it. So, let's talk about the culture of Ghol-Gan, and we'll talk about some of the inhabitants as they were, and the ruins to finish up today. There are some known ruins that you can talk about. Modern scholars will agree that Ghol-Gan did not use any sort of currency. Aslanti coins have been found in Ghol-Gan ruins. They seem to have been solely used as trade good valued for their precious metals and artistry rather than the actual monetary good. So it was a very trade good kind of society. It's believed that from the classical period onwards, food and necessities were distributed based on status as well as a complex system of auguries and mysterious superstitions. The institutions responsible for these distributions, especially in the later years, were corrupted. In the political system of Ghol-Gan, even in the earlier classical period, power was in the hands of tyrants and their chosen officers, and power was abused for their own selfish gains. So it was seen that there was this societal kind of distribution of a lot of goods. There was a trade system, but there was a lot of corruption in it, and yes, the classical era was the era of tyrants in control of it. In the prehistoric and pre-classical areas, most of the manufactured items were made of perishable materials. It wasn't until the classical area that the Ghol-Gan people mastered bronze, and it was towards the end of the classical they mastered iron and steel. They forged mighty metal weapons to help in their conquests. Some of their weapons are based on their celestial patrons, the moon and sun, have survived to present. They were most renowned out of all, though, for, of course, their stonework. Their incredible buildings. They could even carve stone into armor, dazzling jewels made of jade and obsidian. Most of their most powerful tyrants were bedecked in stone armor and jewelry that looked more like living statues than living beings. Magical jewelry from Ghol-Gan is still highly valued by anybody else who might wear it as an arm torque or a belt, ring, necklace, or choker. You know, you can still find uses for some of their magical jewelry because it has power still. So I mentioned Ibelios, which was off of Casmarin, which was connected with those that had fled Ghol-Gan. During the beginning of the post-class, or it was the end of the classical period, where their empire of Golarion on the continent and on the remote island of Ibedos was formed. So those of Ibedos owe their existence to the Cyclops that emigrated there from Ghol-Gan during the decline. The giants have dwindled in their number. They and the humans there do continue to coexist to this day. The greatest mortals earn the right of myth-speaking, which the Cyclops foresees now that a mighty hero might attain mythical power through great deeds. So many of these hero gods have since ruled over Ibedos city-state, granting spells to followers, heralding new prosperity or tyranny. Since Eridan's death and prophecy itself, the tradition has failed with troubling frequency. The last hero gods age and dwindle, and new generation heroes must combine the threat to the island, the fatalistic beast Osmakio. So Ibedos is an interesting place because it has probably some of the only basically descendants of Cyclops from Ghol-Gan that haven't degenerated in a way into the darkness that they had. So some of them still exist there. It's just that it's probably the last place that you'll find anybody of some civilization that's a direct descendant from Ghol-Gan. What's left over from that civilization. And it's been so long, it certainly has changed probably now. The Age of Darkness and what's beyond. And even then, their powers and strength are diminishing. The humans still live there, but the Cyclops they're dying off. So, here's an undead Cyclops from Ghol-Gan that is a tombkeeper. Enjoy that as we talk about some inhabitants of Ghol-Gan beyond the Cyclopses and a bunch of their ruins, because the ruins certainly could be haunted by those things. Temple guardians and stuff like that. Undead Cyclopses. The citizens of Ghol-Gan were Cyclopses. But they weren't what they could have been called in modern times. In modern times, they're ravenous and violent people a lot of times. Very tribal. Very much so like a Cyclops in comparison to like some of the more savage giants, ogres, things like that. They're kind of degenerated into that point. But during the civilization, there were oracles, soothsayers, engineers, emperor. It is interesting to note, though, that the great Cyclopses, who are more feral and destructive, weren't actually a product of the decline of the Ghol-Gan civilization. They were just actually recorded having dwelt outside the cities during the height of the classical era. So it's almost like a degenerate cousin that exists even during the classical era that gained more influence over their lesser beings. So, let's talk about some ruins you could visit of Ghol-Gan, the Golgani ruins. So, Golgani magic users infused their craft into buildings and structures they built, so many have survived the ravages of time. It is very similar to the ruins of the Cyclops Kingdom in northern Camaswan, that were also connected, there were people of Ghol-Gan were also Cyclops. So basically, there's evidence. The ruins themselves didn't lend themselves originally to being Cyclops. It was comparing to other ruins in other places, which were known evidence of being Cyclops ruins. That meant they were connected together. Effectively, to connect the dots of learning the ruins that are being discovered were Cyclops ruins. The ruins dot the lands they once controlled, even now. Many are scattered across the seafloors of the Arcadian Ocean. A lot are within the area of the Eye of Bendigo. Some of these ruins are inhabited by the modern Cyclopses, who are degenerate descendants of their people. They're spread across many modern nations as it is, and the ruins on dry lands are the most easily explored. Ancient cities, towering ziggurats. These are the kind of things you hear when you think of Ghol-Gan. The most famous of these ruins that you can still find are the City of Bleeding Stones, which are an ancient ruin on the island of Devil Arches. It's still haunted by some kind of evil. Ganats Gasau, the largest ruin on the Cannibal Islands. It houses the Blood Queen, the immortal servant of the alien deities worshipped by the post-classical Golgani, and the current worship by the Kurisu people of the Cannibal Islands. So, the Gold Phoenix Aviary, a hidden aviary that's home to the Phoenix Aaron Crest, who has captured the last patriarch of Golgani. I'm going to butcher this one. Iminax Zos, a stretch of the plains south of the Terra Uplands. That was once the great arena, the greatest arenas in all of Ghol-Gan. The ghosts of its combatants still haunt the cursed region to this day. Sumithia, a mountain retreat for seers on what was the island of empty eyes in Shackles. That was Sumithia was in the Buccaneers of Shackled Sea adventure path. If you want to check out some stuff in the adventures that the characters for that game had there, I can shout that out for my own stuff in the middle of talking about it. The Temple of Ravenous Moons was a temple in the Terwa Uplands, whose white marble was stained red by the sheer number of blood sacrifices there. Every expedition to explore its interior has failed to return. There's Tarzaban, the ancient capital of it, that now lies somewhere beneath the waves in the Arcadian Ocean. It's known about, but hasn't been explored. And Zathum, a temple that served as the bastion and final resting place of the last patriarch of Golgani, Amelian the Sixth. So, if you want to go visit any of these places, yep. A lot of these places are very pleasant to visit, and honestly, it's the unfortunate thing that many of them are post-classical places that are just filled with very awful things. I mean, just go visit the Temple of the Ravenous Moon. Don't return. Probably. Pretty bad. Just visit. But that is, in essence, all gone. It's interesting to see that Cyclopses, in what is modern-day Golarion, more oftentimes are tribal, violent, savage. It was not only losing their connection to their civilization, the way their civilization was destroyed. and then combined with this great Dark Age, basically destroyed an essence of them having a course to rebuild anything in their civilization. Humans had a chance. The wreckage of those that survived Aslan, those that existed in other parts of the world during the times of Aslan and Thassalan, the survivor of both those empires. They all had a chance to rebuild. Their empires fell because of the event. Ghol-Gan fell because it went mad. And fell into a degeneracy of blood, death, sacrifice, cannibalism, monsters. They took on the most base and darkest aspects of society and made them their civilization. And as much as there are violent and destructive civilizations, still to this day in Golarion, where there's a lot of savage people, many of them have the opportunity to raise up, and honestly, many of them don't fall as far as the Cyclops of Ghol-Gan did. They fell far. They fell hard. They destroyed themselves. What little remains of them is so scattered. Their attempts to escape, destroyed by the Starstone. And what, as I said, the core little aspect of Ghol-Gan that remains is on one island where these people might not be the savages that the rest of their people have become, but they are a fraction of them, and they are declining, and they are falling, and these very few Cyclopses have lost their ways of what was great in the post-classical to classical period. In the classical period, where they were at their height and strength, could not be regained. They are a tale that is sad, as it is dark and horrible. It is a tale of great rise and great fall. Perhaps something like this may have happened to, honestly, Thassalan, or maybe even Aslan, if their civilizations had continued. Who knows? Certainly, Thassalan dealt with a lot more darker things, and their lords dealt with dark alien things and did many terrible things. Easily could have meant a degeneration could have occurred there. Aslan, maybe not so much. But it is a warning to civilizations, especially in Golarion now, that the fall is not as far as you think it is. The corruption is much closer than you think it is. And the blood can much more easily run in the streets. You may say yourself civilized, but it does not take much for that fall. It is a warning. That is Ghol-Gan's legacy more than anything. A warning to others what happens when you stray too deep, when you go mad, and when you give in to the most darkest, wicked things that are out there. Alien creatures that worry not of your existence. And you just go mad. Still, if you want to go out there and explore ruins of Ghol-Gan, there are plenty of them. Plenty of adventures to be had in them. Ancient mysteries, magicals, artifacts, treasures to have. Adventure with their own salt. You check any of these out. They don't hearken to ancient technologies and super magics of places like Aslan and Thassalonians. But still, Ghol-Gan had its strengths, had its powers, had its artifacts. And there are still things to be discovered there. And certainly, it's probably a lot easier to get to than some of those other places. Not safely. Well, and not all of them are easy. Ocean floor is pretty difficult to explore. So to you adventurers out there, I say, explore away. Whether it's a current famous ruin or a new one that you are a master events for. There are plenty of places that the ancient Cyclops people once called home. Anyway, so that will be it for today. I hope you enjoyed learning about Ghol-Gan. Ghol-Gan is an interesting empire because it degenerates in such a dark and dangerous and deadly way. I like the alliteration there for a second. I felt like its darkness was a good reason to talk about it today in Spooktober. So, if you are checking this out live on Twitch, you can always leave a comment in the Twitch chat if you want to do it. I did ask if any of you have ever dealt with Cyclops or the Ghol-Gan ruins in any way. In my game, Ken, as I said, Buccaneer Shackles Season, Skulls and Shackles Adventure Path, dealt with this a little bit. If you're joining me on YouTube, hey YouTube, you can also leave a comment down below. It's a great way to interject with this. Other ways to give support are if you're on Twitch, you can follow. If you're on YouTube, leave a subscription. Both of those are the best ways to leave it. The comments in either place. If you're over on YouTube, other things like leaving a like, ringing the bell, those are great ways to also give some support. And if you want to see stuff about what I'm doing, schedules, all that stuff on social media, I have a Discord at twitter.com where I say random things occasionally, share some pictures of some random nature stuff, and most of the time just give schedules and updates and stuff like that. That's most of it. And complain about how it's freaking, like, temperature changes now. That would be cool. That's all the shout-outs I have. I've caught my head. Oh, you want to see the stuff live on Twitch? The Twitch schedule is for tabletop stuff is usually on. I'll give that, and then everything's updated a few days later and put up on YouTube. So if you don't watch me live on Twitch, you can always check it out on YouTube. But if you want to join me live, it's every Tuesdays, Thursdays, and Saturdays for tabletop things. Tuesdays, Thursdays, early afternoon, usually between 1 or 2, depending on life schedule, sometimes a little later. And then around pretty on the nose, 11 o'clock on Saturday mornings. Saturday mornings tend to be World of Darkness. Thursdays tend to be a couple tabletop Pathfinder topics. You know, Tuesday's my grab bag. I also am going to have the Crimson Queen starting on November 1st. If you haven't checked it out, or after you're checking this out after November 1st, watch it up on YouTube. It's my live play of Curse of the Crimson Throne, Pathfinder Adventure Path, with the new adventures, a little edited down, some changes here and there, but it's basically the effective. We're running through the adventure path. It's going to start soon. Very fun. Check it out. And discussing tabletop discussion show. We talk about news of the week, some deep topic dives and stuff like that on Saturdays at 6 p.m. EST. And that's Wednesdays at 9 p.m. live, usually up on Thursdays or Fridays for things like Crimson Creek. So, alright, that's all my shoutouts. That's all I can think about. That's a schedule. I do also be doing a stream on Twitch, but I don't know if you're here for that. But if you are, please check it out. It's Mondays, Wednesdays, Fridays. Until the next time I see all of you out there, you know, enjoy some Spooktober, some interesting deep dives into spooky topics, and I bid all of you out there a farewell.